August 19, 1944. Deep inside a commandeered chateau east of Paris, the Wehrmacht headquarters buzzed with the low hum of maps being shuffled and cigarettes being lit. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of fresh coffee, rare luxuries still clinging to the German command, even as their empire cracked. Field Marshal Walter Model, the Führer's fireman, stood over a sprawling operations table, his staff officers leaning in like wolves circling a wounded prey. Reports from the front painted a picture they had seen before. American tanks charging forward, yes, but supply lines stretching impossibly thin across hundreds of miles of liberated French countryside. One colonel tapped a ruler against the map, tracing the distance from the Normandy beaches to Patton's spearheads. 400 miles, gentlemen, 400. A ripple of knowing laughter spread through the room. The armies have outrun their logistics again. Their mechanical toys will soon be nothing but scrap iron waiting for our counterattack. You can almost hear the contempt in their voices, the same contempt that had carried the Wehrmacht through Poland, France, and the early days of Russia. To the German professional soldier, war was about iron discipline, operational art, and the superior will of the fighting man. American logistics? A joke, a bloated amateur operation built on wasteful abundance and Hollywood bravado. Machines required fuel, parts, and endless maintenance. History taught that no army could sustain a blitzkrieg over such distances without secure railheads and forward depots, and the Americans had neither. "Let them come," another officer muttered, stubbing out his cigarette. "Their tanks will drink their last drops of gasoline somewhere near the Seine, and our panzers will feast." They had studied the numbers, or they thought they had. The U.S. Army was impressive on paper, but reality favored the defender who knew the ground, the weather, and the limits of mechanized warfare. Horses still pulled much of the German artillery in wagons, reliable in mud and scarcity. The Americans, by contrast, were slaves to their trucks and jeeps. Strip away the fuel, and their thunder would turn to silence. Little did they know that 125 miles away, in the chaos of the Normandy rear areas, something unprecedented was already stirring. Thousands of olive-drab trucks were being loaded under harsh floodlights. Black and white hands alike worked through the night, stacking crates of ammunition, jerry cans of gasoline, and rations. Engines rumbled to life in a growing roar that would soon drown out every German assumption about what was possible in modern war. The German generals laughed that night. They laughed at the very idea that American industry and ingenuity could rewrite the rules of logistics. But out on the dusty roads of northern France, the Red Ball Express was about to turn their laughter into ashes. The first convoys were forming. The race was on. August 25, 1944, Normandy beachhead rear areas, midnight. The darkness pulsed with the growl of thousands of engines. Floodlights cut harsh beams across endless rows of olive-drab GMC 2.5-ton trucks, the workhorse Jimmies, their canvas tops rolled back, beds already stacked high with jerry cans of gasoline, crates of 105mm shells, and K-rations. Dust hung thick in the air, mixing with the sharp smell of diesel and hot rubber. Men shouted orders in the chaos, while mechanics swarmed over engines that had already seen too many miles. This was no ordinary supply run. This was the birth of the Red Ball Express. You can almost feel the urgency in the air, the kind that comes when an entire army is racing faster than its own shadow. Patton's Third Army had torn across France at breakneck speed. His tanks were devouring ground, but they were starving for fuel. Some units were down to their last few gallons. One more day without resupply and the spearhead would stall, becoming easy meat for German counterattacks. Colonel Loren Ayers, nicknamed Little Patton by his men, moved like a man possessed. In just 36 hours of frantic planning, he had pulled together truck companies from across the rear echelons, port battalions, quartermasters, anyone who could grip a steering wheel. 2 drivers per truck for round-the-clock operation. No rest, no excuses. Keep 'em rolling became the only law that mattered, and rolling they did. By dawn on the 25th, the first convoys thundered out of the assembly areas. Red circular markers, borrowed from the old railroad red ball priority freight system, were slapped onto every hood and bumper. These trucks had absolute right-of-way. Civilian traffic banned. Other military vehicles diverted. 2 great one-way loops were carved into the battered French road network. One highway feeding forward, another returning empty trucks for reload. No stopping, no slowing, 24 hours a day. The drivers, 75% of them were Black American soldiers, young men from places like Harlem, Chicago's South Side, and the cotton fields of the Deep South. Many had never driven anything bigger than a farm truck before shipping out. Now they sat behind the wheel of machines carrying the lifeblood of an army, pushing 25 miles per hour through dust, rain, and blackout conditions, dodging craters left by retreating Germans who had blown every bridge they could. Imagine it, bone-rattling vibration through your spine as the Big Jimmy bounces over patched roads, eyes burning from fatigue and dust, German snipers and stragglers still lurking in the hedgerows, mechanical breakdowns every few miles, tires shredded, engines overheating, axles cracking under the impossible loads. Still they kept coming, an endless river of steel and rubber and exhausted men flowing eastward like a heartbeat that refused to quit. The Germans were about to discover that the American way of war wasn't just about brave soldiers and clever generals. It was about an entire nation's factories, ingenuity, and sheer refusal to accept limits. And that discovery would hit them harder than any artillery barrage. September 1st, 1944, somewhere near Chartres, France. The horizon trembled with the thunder of armor. General George S. Patton stood in the cupola of his command tank, binoculars pressed to his eyes, a cigar clenched between his teeth. The man they called Old Blood and Guts was in his element, moving faster than any army in history had ever dreamed. His Third Army had covered ground that left even his own staff breathless. But only days earlier, the tanks had begun to cough and sputter. Fuel gauges hovered near empty. Crews siphoned from disabled vehicles. Some Shermans sat silent, their crews cursing the rear echelons, while German rear guards slipped away to fight another day. Then the red ball arrived. You can almost smell the gasoline fumes rising from the endless columns of trucks that now snaked along the battered roads. Drivers, hollow-eyed from days without proper sleep, pulled into makeshift depots under the roar of aircraft overhead. They didn't stop for pleasantries. Crates were yanked off, jerry cans slammed onto the ground, and the empty trucks turned around immediately for the long haul back to the beaches. Patton's tanks drank deep. Within hours, engines that had gone cold roared back to life. Columns of steel, hundreds of Shermans, half-tracks, and tank destroyers lurched forward again, chewing up the French countryside at speeds that shattered every textbook rule of mechanized warfare. One division after another reported the miracle: fuel sufficient, ammunition topped off, ready to advance. Patton didn't waste a second. He pushed his commanders mercilessly. "Keep moving," he barked into radios. "We'll win this war by making the Germans react to us instead of the other way around." His forces swept toward the Seine River, bypassing pockets of resistance, cutting supply lines, and creating chaos in the German retreat. Paris itself would soon fall, but Patton's eyes were already fixed further east, towards Metz, towards the Saar, towards the very heart of Germany. Back in the Wehrmacht command posts, the mood had begun to shift. The laughter was fading. Reports flooded in that defied belief. American forces, which should have been logistically crippled after racing 300 miles from Normandy, were somehow gaining strength. Intelligence officers stared at maps in disbelief. How were the armies maintaining this tempo? Their supply lines should have collapsed under their own weight. Instead, the enemy seemed to possess an inexhaustible river of fuel and bullets. One captured German staff officer would later recount the growing unease. The sound of those American trucks, day and night, a constant low rumble on the horizon that never seemed to end. It played on the nerves of men who had grown used to making every liter of gasoline count, every shell a calculated gamble. The Wehrmacht still moved on horses in many sectors. Reliable, yes, but heartbreakingly slow compared to this mechanical avalanche. Yet the cost to the Red Ball drivers mounted with every mile. The one-way highways became graveyards of wrecked trucks pushed into ditches, tires shredded by debris, engines seized from relentless operation without proper cooling. Young black soldiers, many still in their early 20s, fought their own private war against exhaustion, mechanical failure, and the ever-present threat of ambush. They drove without headlights at night, navigating by moonlight and sheer willpower. Some fell asleep at the wheel and never woke up. Others pushed their jimmies until the transmission screamed in protest. Colonel Ayres and his quartermasters performed miracles of improvisation, cannibalizing parts, training new drivers on the fly, prioritizing fuel above all else. At its peak, the Red Ball pushed forward more than 12,000 tons in a single day. Over the operation's life, nearly 412,000 tons of supplies crossed those dusty roads, enough to keep an entire army not just alive, but charging forward like a force of nature. Patton knew exactly who to thank. He would later call the Red Ball drivers among the most vital contributors to victory. Without them, his Blitz would have become a footnote instead of legend. But even as American tanks thundered toward the German border, fresh challenges loomed. The farther east they pushed, the longer the supply lines stretched. Winter was coming. The Germans were regrouping behind the Siegfried Line, preparing one last desperate stand. And in Berlin, the High Command was beginning to ask the dangerous question: what kind of industrial monster have we awakened on the Western Front? The laughter had stopped. Now came something far more dangerous: fear. September 1944. A forward German observation post near the Meuse River. The rain fell in cold sheets, turning the ground into sucking mud that clung to boots like guilt. Oberst Heinrich von Lutwitz lowered his binoculars with trembling hands. What he had just witnessed made his stomach twist. Column after column of American armor, Shermans with their high-velocity guns, Hellcats and lumbering tank destroyers, moving at speeds his own exhausted panzer crews could barely match even in the best of times. Behind them, stretching back as far as the eye could see, came the trucks. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. An unbroken steel serpent winding through the French countryside, headlights piercing the gloom even under sporadic Luftwaffe harassment. "Impossible," he muttered to his adjutant. The word tasted like ash. Just weeks earlier, in those smoke-filled chateaus, they had laughed. Now that laughter haunted every staff meeting like a ghost. Intelligence summaries no longer spoke of temporary American overextension. They spoke of something far more terrifying, an enemy that treated logistics as an offensive weapon. You can almost feel the chill in the German bunkers as the truth settled in. The Red Ball Express wasn't a desperate gamble. It was a system, a brutal, unforgiving, magnificent system. American quartermasters had calculated consumption rates with cold precision. A single armored division in heavy combat burned through 500,000 gallons of gasoline in a week. The Red Ball delivered it daily. While German forces hoarded every liter and prayed for captured stocks, the Americans simply built a highway of supply out of nothing. Further east, Field Marshal Modell's staff pored over updated maps with growing dread. Patton's Third Army had advanced 600 miles in less than 2 months. The speed was obscene. Bridges blown by retreating Germans were bypassed or repaired with terrifying speed by American engineers. Fuel dumps appeared like mushrooms after rain. Where the Wehrmacht expected the American advance to wither and die, it only grew stronger, fed by an endless convoy that operated with the rhythm of a factory production line. The human face of this machine was as remarkable as its scale. Those drivers, predominantly black soldiers from the segregated transportation corps, pushed themselves beyond endurance. 24-hour shifts became 48. They ate cold rations behind the wheel. They fixed flat tires in pouring rain while German stragglers took potshots from the tree line. One driver, Primate James Jackson from Detroit, later recalled keeping himself awake by singing gospel hymns at the top of his lungs as his Jimmy barreled through the blackout. Many wrote letters home they knew might never be delivered. Others simply drove until their eyes bled from dust and exhaustion. Accidents claimed more lives than enemy fire. Trucks overturned in ditches, head-on collisions in the dark, overloaded vehicles shedding tires and axles like autumn leaves. Yet the flow never stopped. When one company faltered, another one took its place. When engines died, mechanics performed battlefield surgery with wrenches and willpower. At its peak, the Red Ball Express operated 5,968 vehicles and carried more than 400,000 tons of vital supplies before its run finally ended. Back in Washington and London, generals marveled at the numbers. In Berlin, the mood turned poisonous. Hitler raged at his commanders for underestimating the American shopkeepers. The same officers who once sneered at U.S. logistics now begged for more fuel, more parts, more time. Their finely tuned doctrine of Bewegungskrieg, the war of movement, had been turned against them by an enemy that refused to let supply dictate tempo. Patton, sensing the shift, pressed even harder. His famous quote rang through the ranks: "I don't want to die for my country. I want the other poor bastard to die for his." Thanks to the Red Ball, his men had the means to make that happen. They liberated town after town. They shattered German cohesion. They stood on the threshold of the Reich itself. But every miracle extracts a price. As autumn rains turned to early winter frost, the Red Ball's trucks showed their scars. Worn-out engines, chassis bent under impossible strain, tires so bald they might as well have been running on rims. The operation couldn't last forever. New ports like Antwerp were finally opening. Rail lines were being restored. The great emergency highway of trucks would soon give way to more sustainable systems. Yet its work was done. The German High Command had been forced to confront a terrible new reality. They were no longer fighting an army. They were fighting an entire industrial civilization that had decided to mobilize its full weight and hurl it across an ocean. The laughter had died months ago. Now, only the sound of those endless wheels remained, rolling, relentless, unforgiving, echoing like judgment. November 16th, 1944. A rain-lashed depot somewhere east of Reims. The sky was the color of dirty steel, and the wind carried the bite of approaching winter. The Great Red Ball Express was reaching its limit. After 81 days of non-stop operation, the trucks that had once looked invincible now resembled battle-scarred veterans, fenders dented, paint scorched, engines coughing like old men. Many had been driven more than 10,000 miles in relentless cycles with only the most emergency maintenance. Tires were so worn that drivers joked they were riding on prayers, yet still they rolled. You can almost taste the diesel and exhaustion in the cold air as the final convoys unloaded their precious cargo. Black soldiers from the 666th, 671st, and dozens of other truck companies slumped against their jimmies, sharing cigarettes and quiet stories. They had become legends in their own right, though the segregated army rarely gave them the credit they deserved on the front pages back home. Men like Technical Sergeant William McBriar, who kept his convoy moving through 3 straight days of rain and German sniper fire, or Corporal Charles McDonald, who once repaired a shattered axle with scavenged parts and baling wire under artillery fire, just so his load of 105mm shells could reach Patton's guns in time. These drivers had done more than haul supplies. They had carried an idea that the American war machine would not be bound by old European rules of scarcity and careful calculation. While German generals still dreamed of elegant maneuvers and decisive battles, The Red Ball simply overwhelmed them with volume and velocity. At its absolute peak, the Red Ball moved an astonishing 12,342 tons of supplies in a single day. In total, its drivers delivered over 412,000 tons, fuel that powered the breakout from Normandy, ammunition that shattered German defenses, food and medicine that kept the advance alive. Patton's own words later captured the debt. The Red Ball had been indispensable. Without it, his lightning drive across France might have ended in humiliating silence somewhere along the Seine. Instead, it had carried Allied forces to the very gates of Germany. The psychological blow to the Wehrmacht was even greater than the material one. The enemy that was supposed to collapse under the weight of its own ambition had instead revealed an industrial endurance the Germans could not match. In German command posts, the reckoning had become total. Captured diaries and post-war interrogations reveal the same stunned refrain: "We did not believe it possible." Field Marshal Model and his peers watched their carefully husbanded reserves disappear under American artillery barrages that never seemed to run dry. The laughter of August had been replaced with a grim acceptance. The armies had not just solved logistics, they had weaponized it. What the German army achieved through brilliant operational art in 1940, the Americans were achieving through sheer, unrelenting material superiority, backed by human courage. But the price had been staggering. The Red Ball suffered over 1,000 accidents, dozens of fatalities, and hundreds of vehicles destroyed or worn beyond repair. Many drivers carried invisible wounds, nerves frayed by endless night driving, bodies broken by constant vibration, spirits scarred by the knowledge that their vital work would likely be remembered only as a footnote. As new ports like Antwerp came fully online and repaired railroads began carrying the burden, the Red Ball Express was officially stood down on November 16th. The great one-way highways fell silent. The red circles came off the hoods. The surviving trucks limped back to regular duty. Many destined for the Pacific Theater, were the final push into Germany. Yet their spirit lived on. The operation proved that modern war belonged to the side that could sustain momentum across vast distances. It forced the German high command into a defensive crouch they never fully escaped. And it gave Patton the fuel to keep attacking when others urged caution, setting the stage for the brutal fighting still to come in the Ardennes and beyond. The men who drove those trucks returned to a country that still denied them full equality. Many would fight for recognition for decades after the war, but on those dusty French roads in the late summer and autumn of 1944, they had already proven something profound. Courage and determination wear no color. They simply roll forward. The German generals had stopped laughing long ago. Now, as winter closed in, and Hitler prepared one final desperate gamble in the Ardennes, the full weight of what the Red Ball had enabled was about to crash down on the Reich like an avalanche. December 1944. The frozen forests of the Ardennes loomed dark and silent under a leaden sky. But the real story had already been written weeks earlier on the open roads of northern France. The German command no longer laughed. In fortified bunkers and candlelit headquarters, officers who once dismissed American logistics as amateur theater now spoke of the Red Ball Express with a mixture of awe and resentment. Intelligence reports, once confident in predictions of American collapse, now carried a bitter refrain. The enemy's supply lines had not merely held, they had become a weapon of conquest. You can almost hear the distant rumble even now, months later, as if the ghosts of those thousands of trucks still haunted the French countryside. The Red Ball had done what no one, Allied or Axis, thought possible. In 81 days of relentless operation, it had delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies across a broken, war-torn landscape. It kept Patton's Third Army slashing forward at speeds that redrew the maps of Europe.
It turned a potential stalemate into a breakout that shattered German cohesion from Normandy to the Siegfried Line. Patton himself understood the debt better than most. His tanks had not advanced on courage alone. They had advanced on gasoline delivered by exhausted men in battered jimmies, on shells hauled through nights lit only by muzzle flashes and tracer rounds, on the raw industrial muscle of a nation that refused to slow down. Where the Wehrmacht measured fuel in liters and calculated every kilometer, the Americans had simply opened the floodgates. The red ball wasn't elegant, it was brute force married to improvisation, and it worked. The human cost lingered long after the last red circle was painted over. Hundreds of drivers, mostly black soldiers relegated to the transportation corps, had given everything. Some died in fiery wrecks on rain-slicked curves. Others succumbed to sheer exhaustion, falling asleep at the wheel and never waking. Many carried home bodies broken by endless vibration and spirits marked by a war that asked them to bleed for a country that still forced them to ride in the back of the bus. Their story remained largely untold in the whitewashed headlines of 1944, but on those roads, they had written their names into history with tire tracks and willpower. For the Germans, the reckoning cut deeper than lost territory. Their entire philosophy of war, built on speed, surprise, and superior operational skill, had been overtaken by an enemy who treated logistics as an offensive arm. The same generals who sneered at American materialism now faced an avalanche of steel they could not outmaneuver. The Red Ball Express forced them into a defensive war they were doomed to lose. It bought the Allies the time and momentum needed to open Antwerp, restore rail lines, and prepare for the final assault into the Reich. By the time Hitler launched his desperate Ardennes offensive in mid-December, hoping to split the Allies and capture fuel depots, the momentum gifted by the Red Ball had already done its work. Patton would pivot his army with legendary speed, fueled by the very systems born in those frantic summer months. The laughter of August had become the death rattle of the Wehrmacht's illusions. The Red Ball Express officially ended, but its spirit rolled on. It proved that in modern industrial war, the winner is often the side that can sustain the fight longest and farthest. It exposed the limits of German resourcefulness against American abundance backed by determination. And it gave the Allied cause something priceless: the ability to keep attacking when every classical military principle said they should stop. Years later, veterans on both sides would reflect on those dusty convoys. German officers admitted the psychological blow, the constant, unrelenting sound of engines on the horizon, the knowledge that no matter how many trucks they destroyed, more always came. American drivers, finally given their due in reunions and quiet conversations, spoke not of glory, but of duty. We just kept rolling so the boys up front could keep fighting. The German generals had laughed at U.S. logistics in that smoke-filled chateau. They never laughed again. The Red Ball Express didn't just fuel Patton's Blitz, it helped fuel the liberation of Europe and rewrote the rules of what an army could achieve when its rear echelon refused to break.